It's the Washington Treaty issues. It's the overall Equitable Treaty, and it's the 4th of June. And I'm going to give you a heads up now. A lot of these slides are pretty darn wordy. There are also some very cool slides in here. I mean, some really, really cool slides. But mostly they are other people's drawings. In fact, they're all other people's drawings. I deleted my own drawings. They were just not that good compared to the other people. What other people managed to put it together. It's life. You realize your drawings are just not that good. So, this video, I am honestly not sure how long it's going to be. It could end up being 75 minutes of me ranting. It could be 45 minutes. It could be 50 minutes. So far, this is the 4th version. And as I am recording this, it's May. As you are seeing this, it's the 4th of June. And on the 4th of June, I'm in Canada. Touch wood, all things being well, and fingers crossed, I will have crossed the Atlantic on the 2nd. Have done a live at some point on the 2nd. On the 3rd, I will have spent the morning aboard HMCS Haida. Then gone and picked up Clarke and the rest of the crew from the airport in Toronto. Then we'd have gone to our dinner that evening, very nicely being hosted by a very good friend in Canada. And then today, on the 4th, me and Drac are going around Haida. That is what we're doing today. Well, we'll have done today, probably by the time this comes out. We could still be aboard Haida. Honestly, there's going to be a lot of effort to try and take me away from that ship. I do admit this. So, 4th of June. If you're seeing this when it's come out, sorry, time has passed. But there are other ships we are hoping to visit. You're more than welcome to be at them, to ask us questions as we go around, and hopefully by the time this comes out, I'll have tweeted, put up on Discord or on the YouTube commentary exactly what details there are going to be for the public lectures. But anyway, into this we go. So the Washington Treaty series. This is the last of the Washington Treaties videos. Probably. I'm almost certain I'm going to have to do a question response one, and I have decided, as I've been filming these and going through them, and it's sort of some versions have changed, probably a little bit, but mostly kept it the same. On the 16th of June, after the overall Equitable Treaty for the London series, there will be a live on the Treaty series. I will somehow produce, probably just combine the two Equitable Treaty PowerPoints, stick them together, and go through and try and answer any questions you have live. Capital Ships for the London Treaties comes out tomorrow, 5th of June. Aircraft Carriers, 6th of June. 7th of June, Pensacola class. The US Navy cruisers series begins. 8th of June, cruisers under the London Treaties. Seems sensible. Destroyers, 9th of June. 10th of June, it will be either capital ships, cruisers, or destroyers of the London Treaties. It might even be a combination of all three, although that would be quite a long one. Show you what I would build under the treaties. Soups and other ships, 11th of June. And fortifications, 12th of June. Overall Equitable Treaty, 15th of June. And there is the Gusciano class on the 14th of June. There is, on the day I'm returning from Canada, the 13th of June, I will get back on the 13th of June, there will be a US Cruiser Doctrine video. So I've tried to spread out things so that people can have watched the treaty videos before they see the overall Equitable Treaty, treaty, and before they get the live discussion, so people can, if they want to get involved and they want to talk, they will have had a chance to see what I was saying and the reasoning behind what I'm saying. And here is the Canada trip. Yeah. So we've got 2 nights which are scheduled for possibly public lectures. we've got a few days free, theoretically free, or wandering around, so that basically we can do stuff, and I can make sure Drac doesn't try and burn himself out like he did on his recent trip to America. I realize that as far as Mrs. Drac is concerned, I'm responsible for him surviving this trip. I have been told this. So yes, I am building in time to make sure nothing bad happens to him. But yeah, it's going to be fun. Said, feeling Hyder today, and dinner with Canadian fans in the evening. So please, if you're interested, come along. G3 carrier as designed by Pine Martin Emily. I had a chat with her, and this is one of the things we were sort of looking at was, could the G3s have been converted to aircraft carriers? And they could have been. And one of the suggestions I put forward was 4 of them being converted to carriers. If all 4 had been converted to aircraft carriers, that would have been a very interesting scenario for the UK, a very interesting scenario for probably the rest of the world. And I did point out when I put forward that scenario that if that happened with the RN, then the USN would probably do equivalent. So if the RN got 4 G3s, and I do remember the design profile for us and the thing details put it in the carrier conversion video instead of the carrier video, what the USN, there's some ideas discussed about what the USN would do, and the Japanese. But remember, this was done under the tonnage scenario set up by me. It's a 10-10-7 ratio, and the tonnage limit had been based on the maximum tonnage of a ship you could order would be 33,000 tons. So you're allowed 330,000 tons if you're the UK, and 330,000 tons if the USA, and Japan sort of down less. So it makes sense under those scenarios. There's probably going to be someone going, they couldn't have done that in reality. Well, they couldn't have done that in reality. That's the whole point. There's an equitable treaty. It's different. It is. But Pinemont Emily has done some really cool design work. So, the original ratios. RNs, 5, USN, 5, IJN, 3, Marine Nationale, 1.75, RM, 1.75. Then it gets changed in the various negotiations. You have the capital ships come out of that, and the aircraft, well, where the Marine Nationale and Regia Marina go down to 1.66, and then the aircraft, in terms of aircraft carriers, the Marine Nationale and the Regia Marina go up to 2.2. And so that's the average. But it's the average aboard across capital ships and aircraft carriers. No other ships are affected by the treaty, by the ratio. Yeah, it looks good. You notice it's a twin island structure. It's got the forward island for command and control. It's got the aft island for the funnels because of the G3 design. Now, I have to admit, my one thing is I think the British would have ended up going with a single island structure further aft. But honestly, I can understand why Emily has gone with this, and I do like the design. The treaty is applied to capital ships. It's a tough treaty. What I find inconsistent and difficult to hold bearance with is the figure of 35,000 tons. Everyone is building ships larger than Article 4 and Article 5 allow. Everyone. Everyone has a design Facilities have reached and said, right then, you need more than 35,000 tons to build a ship that fits our requirements. They're all orbiting the 40,000 mark. 42, 43, sometimes some just underneath. It's absurd. It is honestly absurd. Yes, they believe in peace, truth, and the new way of the world. They believe in there being no more wars. And I can't dispute that. I can't disagree with that dream. I just can't. It's a beautiful dream to have. But it's also absurd. You are honestly turning around and saying, right then, no one's going to build the warship they want. They're all going to have to make compromises. There's making everyone equally unhappy, and there's we are going to sacrifice our crew and our service personnel on the altar of our higher ideals if there actually is a war, because we don't want there to be another war. If you don't want there to be another war, you can do two options. You can get everyone to agree to disarm, and if no one will disarm, there's going to be another war. So then give up respectfully. Don't give up the idea of the dream of peace. Please don't give up. That's life. And that's the way I would love to be the military historian whose work is entirely confined to history. All military historians who study it and who learn the realities, the highs and the lows of the human existence that come through the crucible that is warfare, would love it to no longer exist. But until that happens, until that joyous and sacred day, we have to be realistic. And being realistic means if you are signing a treaty where you are knowingly going to put, even if you're saying you're putting all sailors at an equal disadvantage, you're not. You're not responsible for their other nation's sailors. You're not responsible. You're responsible for your own. You're salving your conscience by saying, "Well, the enemy is equally likely to die as our own." What kind of person turns up to the treaty and says that? Yeah, they're all going to be equally bad. So we're equally likely to have our own people killed as you are yours. I've had the misfortune of dealing with some people who are seriously and genuinely twisted by the idea of serving the greater good, and they have some freaked out ways of doing it. But this was not the way to do it. Peace and the greater good. Sivi pacem para bellum. Those who seek peace should prepare for war. Words like that sound so rolling off the tongue. They sound so glib, but they are true. And you have been preparing for war. You've been building these ships. You know roughly what tonnage you need. This is the Washington Treaty as it applies. 35,000 tons standard. Limit of 16-inch guns. That's fine. Okay, yes, I have a personal dream about an 18-inch armed a Queen Elizabeth class, which I'm fairly sure would have existed. Know there are people who claim it was a triple 15-inch turret and etc. and all those things, but Drac, I'm looking at you. But I don't know where that turret would have gone. That turret would have appeared. And honestly, that turret would have probably appeared on the R class, but the Renan and Repulse. So they would have ended up with 9 15-inch guns, which would have been quite nice. But it didn't get built. So 60 inches is fine. A ratio of 5.53, 1.75, 1.75. The important requirement is the RN USN equal, but both have a 6 ship superiority over the IJM. So it's a 15, 15, 9, 5 and a tad, 5 and a tad. If you go with the standard ratio. And remember, the actual ratio is 1.66 and 1.66. Which means 1.66 times 3 is 5. Theoretically. 0.6666 infinitum times 3 is 2. Theoretically. Oh, well, no, in reality, but it's rounding issues going on. The point is, there's a problem there. We know that the Japanese wanted 7. We know that, a 7-10 ratio. Why did the Japanese want a 7-10 ratio? Because they were scared stiff that the Americans would launch an attack on them. And you might go, well, hang on, why are the Americans going to launch an attack on the Japanese? To be honest, the Americans have done it at this point. There was the famous Black Fleet incident with and other incidents in terms of the Japanese-American relationships. They do not exactly have the most trust. And look at this treaty. This treaty is going to get rid of the Anglo-Japanese alliance, in respects. It's going to permanently limit what Japan can build. Yes, infrastructure-wise, they can't support much more. Honestly, they can't. And it's going to limit what they can fortify. This is a treaty which is a glorious win for the Americans because the Japanese had not been on the losing side in World War I. This is something I have mentioned in a previous video, and I'll mention again. The Japanese had not been on the losing side in World War I. Japanese had been on the winning side. The British had been on the winning side. The Americans, late to the party, but have been on the winning side. If there's any winners in World War I. So the French and the Italians. This is a treaty of the winners. And the thing is, the Americans find out, thanks to their intelligence, the bare minimums that nations are going to apply, and they push for it. They really do push for it. And they get the bare minimums in many cases. And what does that do? If you win a treaty so hard, you win it bigly, perhaps even. Or you announce it from the deck of an aircraft carrier when the war's still going on. And there are a few British versions I can also go into. Great. But have you meant the other side no longer has anything to lose by breaking the treaty? That's the problem. There have been many questions when I put this treaty series together of what incentive do nations have to keep to the treaty? Well, if they consistently lose in the treaty, they have no incentive. But if they feel they've won enough that it's in their interest to stay in the treaty, they do keep to the treaty. Nations keep to a treaty when it's in their interest to do so. You have to make sure that treaty is favorable enough to every nation involved that it's in their interest to stay there. And that sometimes means you don't go for the maximum victory for yourself, because otherwise you're setting yourself up for a war later. And remember, I think this is the part of the problem, especially the European powers are so preoccupied with the horror of World War One, and to an extent, some of the American observers are, that they forget not everyone has the same experience of the war as they do. For Japan, the war had been a naval war, which had been fought largely successfully, and a land war in Asia, which they had won. It was successful. The Japanese had not only won the war, but they'd had a winning experience without the same level, the same mass level of horror as the European powers had had. And no bellow would. That changes things. That changes their approach. So, Equitable Treaty is using the precedent of how the cruiser standards were decided upon. So, newest ship in service is HMS Hood. Standards placement listed at the time of 41,200 tons. Based on precedents of rounding up to the 10,000 ton cruiser limit, I put in suggested a limit of 42,000 tons standard. Largest guns in service, Clarke class, 16-inch guns. So 16-inch guns it is. Their ratio. Japan requested a 710 rather than a 3.5, as this would allow just enough strength to make victory less than certain should one of the large powers choose to attack them. This is victory less than certain in the first round. They know they won't win the war because they know they have no chance of beating the infrastructure that either America or Britain has. But it means that they can't just rush them and shoot and presume they're going to win with a 10-7. But the trouble is, if you adjust the Japanese, you have to also adjust the Italians and the French to be fair. So we've gone from 5-3 to 10-7. Okay. Now 3 was to an average of 1.75. Well, if I'm taking the 3 up to 7, I'm timesing it by more than 2. 2.3, you can say. 2.33. Well, if I do 2.33 times 1.75, it comes into a weird number, and I don't like point numbers for ratios. I find it absurd when you have to do that. Also, I find it an area you can cheat in. So I've rounded up to 4. So to retain the 6-ship superiority, which the RN and USN considered essential, you have to have 20 for the Royal Navy, 20 for the US Navy, 14 for the IJN, 8 for the Merchant Marine Nationale, and 8 for the Regia Marina. That makes things different. That does. For the Royal Navy, there are issues, but it's viable. For the US Navy, it's fine. However, the issues do then go on, and this is going to be something I'm going to get into in the cruiser level as well. In a world of 16-inch gun, 42,000 ton standard ton ships, 20,000 ton 12-inch and 13.5 ships are not going to be effective. I've said this before. Death traps will be putting it mildly, which is going to affect the Japanese and the Royal Navy's and the US Navy's calculations. Now, here again, there is more precedent. There is precedent I built upon. I built upon the proposed replacement phase policy for France and Italy. But this would now be applied to all powers equally. So instead of being a European advantage, there is, and then a European advantage, which is understandable because both those powers retain pre-dreadnoughts, which are even less viable. Let's be honest, you could mass the entire world's pre-dreadnought supply at this point and stick them in a battle en masse versus HMS Hood, and Hood would have won. At no point would any signatory be allowed to build more than a fifth of their total tonnage. From 1922, signatories could first build to their limit. Then they could replace any ships laid down prior to 1914 with 14-inch or less guns from 1926 onwards. Those with ships with guns greater than 14-inch but laid down prior to 1914 could begin replacing those from 1930 onwards. All ships laid down 1914-18 could be replaced from 1934 onwards. All ships laid down 1919 to 1922 pre-treaty could be replaced from 1936 onwards. All treaty era ships could not be replaced before they reach 18 years of service. Now, I've gone with 18 years of service because it allows, if you have 20 ships, at least roughly one a year. Eventually, London treaties come out with 26 years. Which, again, if you've got 20 ships, is less than one a year, but not that bad. It's one most years. So you can sort of get it, keep the drumbeat of construction going. And that's important for Britain and America. And why is it important for Britain and America? Well, because the current treaty as it stands stops Britain and America producing ships. It stops them building the big ships. Washington Treaty has no limitations on the number of cruisers you can build, so theoretically, Britain could have kept building 6 cruisers a year, 6 counties every year, until the London Naval Treaty came out, and then just turned around and gone, well, we're not scrapping all our counties, so you have to make our cruiser tonnage allow for all our new ships. Which would be kind of interesting, because it would be 480,000 tons of heavy cruiser, plus Hawkins class. That could have been interesting. And it would probably be matched by light cruiser construction, so yeah, could have been really interesting. But the point is, they go for 26 years. Okay. Anything that allows you to have a drumbeat of construction allows you to keep your industry going. And if we consider some of the current programs we've got, Type 26 is a good example. In Britain, Canada, and Australia, the amount of people I'm reading who are critiquing the costs. And what they seem to be missing is all three nations are to an extent paying for a slow drumbeat of construction in order to retain the capability for construction, on the theory that they therefore can speed up construction if they want to, but also, if they need to, but also because keeping some construction going is cheaper in the long run than having rise and fall and having to pay to rebuild it every time you need to build a new class, because that makes your overall ship construction cheaper. But it makes individual projects look more expensive than others when you're comparing to, let's say, America currently, because they produced a lot more ships, or China, who produces a lot more ships. The point is, if you're building ships, it takes your costs down. If you're actually constructing ships, it takes costs down. The volume allows a level of industry, supports the infrastructure. The moment you cut that volume down, you have to start paying more, because you're sustaining the infrastructure at the level of not just mass to deal with the quantity you're building, but complexity to deal with the quality you want to construct, which again is spread over fewer hulls, so it adds costs. Research to deal with the quality of construction you want to be able to construct, experience to construct that, and capability to construct more should you need. All those things add on extra money, which, if you were actually having a larger fleet in the first place, would be less of a problem because there'd be less cost. So you look like you were getting cheaper, but individual ships, and the programs would look cheaper, but actually you'd be still paying roughly the same amount. It's the economics of warfare. And this is from C. Dodders. He came up with a very interesting idea. I'm presuming it's he. I have to admit that from discussions. And they decided that one of the G3s still gets completed somehow. So instead of Hood, it's 3 G3 carriers, which is rather cool. And yeah, of course, it's one of those interesting scenarios. I have to admit, there is an image of my mind of if this had been what's been done, 3 G3 carriers, 1 G3 actually completed, and you'd have the sort of the fast fleet in service. Let's say the Washington Treaty is delayed till after they've entered service, and so the G3s are converted to carriers. You'd have had Hood, and you'd have also had Tiger there as part of your fast fleet, with Renown and Repulse sitting aft. Probably the way it would have been looked ceremonial is you'd have had the G3 on the same side as Renown, Hood on the same side as Repulse, and Tiger in the middle, the Jutland veteran, etc. The former BT flagship. That would have been quite a photograph to get, and quite an interesting force. As it's applied to aircraft carriers, the treaty is again restrictive to the nth degree. They're worried about aircraft carriers being turned into pseudo battleships. They're worried about aircraft carriers being too big. What I find interesting is I look at the carriers on the constructionist point. There is not a single carrier under construction at this point which comes anywhere near that tonnage limitation. The 33,000 tons or the 27,000 tons. Not a single one. They are so restrictive when it comes to capital ships as they combine them, because they combine the battle cruisers and battleships into one group, which of course immediately undermines the British and the Japanese. The Americans don't have battle cruisers in service. The British and the Japanese do have them as part of their economic warfare capabilities. Suddenly you're limiting capital ships and combining the two groups into one fleet, one force. And you make a problem. You also make it inevitable that the fast battleship is going to appear, but you probably don't perceive that at this point. And let's be honest, the British have already been heading for it with the Queen Elizabeth class. If they built them the small tube boilers, etc., you'd have been talking 27, 28 knot ships. That would have been fast battleship range. Well, if they made the 28 knots. And the aircraft carrier, tonnage limitations. You look at this and you go, why? Okay, gun caliber limit 8-inch. Frankly, I'm not going to worry about that. Probably, to an extent, the Americans are worried about the Furious, Courageous, and Glorious, which carried 15-inch guns and 18-inch guns, respectively. So I can understand them being slightly worried about those things. And they viewed guns as a far more practical weapon than aircraft at this point. But still, Any of the contracting powers may, provided the total tonnage of aircraft carriers is not thereby exceeded, build not more than 2 aircraft carriers, each of tonnage of not more than 33,000 tons stand displacement, and in order to affect economy, any of the contracting powers may use for this purpose any 2 of their ships, whether constructed or in course of construction, which would otherwise be scrapped under provisions of Article 2. Interesting enough, there is a way you could read that that means you could build 2 33,000-ton ships from scratch if you really fancied it. Because it does say, may use for this purpose any 2 of their ships, whether constructed. May. Doesn't say must use. But it's a sort of loophole which I'm fairly sure if you dance through, there would be problems. Although, again, this is the thing. What's this treaty practically enforced by? Threat of war. Is anyone actually going to go to war in 1922? So what do my final rules look like? Well, for aircraft carriers, 10, 10, 7, 4, and 4. Basically, I've used the ratio. I've gone, well, if 33,000 tons is the maximum you're willing to allow, then that should be the tonnage you allow for you set for carriers, not the 27,000 ton. Again, there are construction limits. Any ships to enter service or started prior to 1926 have to be conversions. Between 1926 to 1930, at least 50% of units completed must be conversions. 1930 plus, all ships can be new builds. So, do you wait till 1930 to start your construction and all ships are new builds? Or do you do some conversions? What do you do? Because conversions are less efficient per hull than new builds. And the British know this. Everyone knows this when they're working on ships by this point. As with capital ships, at no point would anything should be allowed to be building more than a fifth of their total tonnage. Then there's service lives. Pre-treaty conversions would be able to got rid of from 1930 onwards. Post-treaty conversions and pre-treaty new builds would be able to replace from 1934 onwards, and post-treaty new builds would have a minimum of 18 years life as with capital ships. That's the other thing. I was combining their years, and I felt that it would be better if they were all the same. Makes it more equitable. This is the other option which Dodder's produced. And this is HMS Hood with her 3 Admiral class sisters. Converted to carriers. And Renana Repulse. Now, you tell me that's not a scary lineup. The question is, if under this treaty they would have replaced Furious, Courageous, and Glorious, or whether those ships would have been done as well. I don't know. Does Britain decide it's cheaper and easier to do 6 conversions? Possibly. If we consider Furious comes in at 22,900 tons, and Courageous 24,210, Glorious 24,970. So you're getting them for 23 and let's say 2 sets of 25,000 tons. You could do it. These in at 33,000 tons. That'd be 99,000 tons plus a very, very nice 72,000 tons, which is 171,000 tons of carrier construction, which out of 330,000 tons is a lot, but it still leaves you roughly 59,000 tons to build other ships or deal with Argus, Eagle, and Hermes and other ships. It's worthwhile thinking about. And it's something certainly the Royal Navy would have thought about with that sort of tonnage limitation. Also, what would the USN have done? Would they have converted all the Lexingtons to carriers? Well, that's a rather interesting idea. Think about it. If all the Lexingtons get converted to carriers. And that could have been interesting because if the Lexingtons had all become aircraft carriers and all had a limit of 33,000 tons, you could have had Lexington, Constellation, Saratoga, Ranger, Constitution, and United States as your first six, as your C2 to C7 of the United States Naval Aviation, Naval aircraft carriers. That would have been a powerful fleet to build it around. Yes, Japan's going to be able to build more carriers, but they build more historically anyway. When they leave the treaty and they suddenly they surge them out. But you're able to build a lot more. And think about it, the USA could have 10 huge carriers. There's capability there. They could convert all their battle cruisers. Also consider those names. Japanese, we have, well, they do have issues with earthquakes, etc. But they would have been able to construct a decent sized force. And yes, the Japanese would have been able to go, well, we have 7, so we have this numerical superiority in the Western Pacific to the US Navy's 5 in the Eastern Pacific. And the Royal Navy is probably 3 sitting in the Indian Ocean. Yeah, you do. But if they combine, they've got 8 to 7. And if they reinforce, they've got a lot more. And it's an example of the construction and the options. And this is the one which has the Admiral class built in. As you can see, you've got Howe, Rodney, Anson, the free Admiral class. And I'm reckoning roughly 32,000 tons would actually be enough. I know I did budget 33,000 earlier, but I think 32,000 could have done it. That's the treaty construction you could have had. And here's the difference. And why does this Equitable treaty make sense? Because if you have this level of construction going on, if you have that level of construction going on, A, technology develops quicker. B, you can put more money into your economy, which can help keep the industry going and infrastructure going, which can help offset things like, I don't know, the 1929 Wall Street crash. But moreover, you don't feel weak. No one feels weak if they feel they're free to construct to meet their own needs. But also, no one can get too strong here because everyone's limited. And it means that you've still got the industry and infrastructure going. So when in the 1930s the fascist powers start to stand up, they have that much further to climb. Because if Versailles is still put in place as it is, which is one of the conditions in this design, Germany is still decimated infrastructure-wise and security and safety-wise. But in return, Britain has the ability to construct the ships it needs. So does America. So does France. So does Italy. In simple terms, construction is good. So then we get into fortifications, and you might notice I'm skipping a bit about cruisers because the whole point is cruisers are limited to 10,000 tons and 8-inch guns. That's all that's limited. That's all that limits any ship below capital ship or aircraft carrier. 10,000 tons and 8-inch guns. That is equitable. The problems come with that is the budgets. It's not the treaty's fault. It's the Royal Navy could have been, if the government had given the funding, they could have churned out 6, they could have churned out 8 a year. It wouldn't have bothered them. And it could have offset some of the lacking of construction of battleships and capital ships and aircraft carriers if they'd been able to keep up a constant drumbeat of cruiser construction. But this is the real problem. The Pacific. And limitations of fortifications, especially as impact Japan. The British can fortify areas. They can fortify Australia, New Zealand. They can fortify Singapore. They can build this wall of fortifications. America can fortify theirs. But Japan's territories which they have won from Germany in the course of World War I. Where they were part of the winning side, they're now restricted. And this creates 3 problems, right? So, you have not enough ships for the Japanese need. They wanted 7 to 10 ratio. You have no ability to fortify your islands. So you can't even feel strength that way. Even though, let's be honest, in real terms, fortifying islands, we will just go around them. Only attack those we need to. Rather like the island campaign they do in World War II. You're basically saying to Japan, yeah, we've given you these things. They're your war victories, but we can take them back anytime we want, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's kind of like if you've got a group of people together and they're celebrating a victory, and you give to one of your team I don't know, I don't drink it, but a champagne glass. But the difference is with their champagne glass versus everyone else's is that it has a little tube running off it, which you have a stopper and you hold. And you can just flick the stopper off and drain their champagne whenever you want. What do? Do they chug the champagne to try and get it down quickly? Do they guard it? Do they try and wrestle you for control of the tube? Something which should be a victory, which is theoretically is part of the victory, and ensuring peace will forever reign, is suddenly turned into a source of fear and embarrassment. So I modified the phrasing as I examined. This is the phrasing as is. This is the phrasing as I suggested. Existing naval facilities may be modernized as appropriate, as long as their total area does not increase, and with full disclosure to other signatories, in order to provide for the repair and maintenance of naval forces. Furthermore, Any improvements made in defense of the existing facilities are limited in armament to equivalent to cruisers with a maximum caliber of 8 inches. You can feel you can make it so that the enemy, if they want to take it, they're going to have to turn up with the full fleet. As I said earlier, they probably won't. But the 8-inch guns, matching cruisers, that basically gives you just enough confidence you don't feel you're going to lose everything at the first whim of an opponent, which makes you feel more confident. I was once told that I humanize nations too much. I give them personalities. I treat them like they're humans. And I turned around to that person and said, what do you do when you're dealing with a crowd of people? Do you treat them like they're a machine, or do you treat them like they're a human with feelings? When you're in charge of a classroom, you are watching the emotion as much as you're watching the faces. The general emotion of the class. You have to pay attention to it. Lose control of the emotion or the attention, and you lose control of the class. Control those things, and or at least maintain a guiding hand on them, and you won't have any problems with your class. It's an old trick, which I was taught by a very wise professor. Very tiny lady. Very, very tiny. Could run a class, lecture theatre, hundreds of students. Never had any problems. It's the same with a country. A country is a collection of humans. They have their culture, they have their worldview. Everything is shaped through their understanding of the world, but they still have emotion. And that's the problem. If we consider the Treaty of Versailles, the issue of the stab in the back theory, that wasn't logical. If you look at the logic of this thing of it, yes, there's Clemenceau with squeeze them till the pips squeak and all that stuff. Yes. But it's about an emotion, and it's the emotional legacy, which is what leads in many ways to the Germany becoming a fertile ground, although it wasn't always predestined. There was plenty of opportunity for it not to turn into a Nazi Germany and it not to become World War II. Weimar Republic was in many ways a very functional and quite advanced state for its era. But the emotion was always there, and emotions don't have logic. The trouble with this treaty, the reason it sets up for there being a world war, is it both undermines the major powers who you're expecting to keep peace, especially when you consider America doesn't join the League of Nations, which is that period's equivalent to the United Nations. Keystone missing is one of the cartoons. And so you've left League of Nations. Really, the nations responsible for it are Britain, which is the only other major naval power, and France. Japan's a member, but Japan's one of the powers which America felt the League of Nations was there to bind. Same with Germany. So in which case, you need to offset it by having those powers feel strong. Italy as well, you need to have them feel strong. You just concluded a treaty which is going to make Japan feel hurt and afraid, and those nations feel that their traditional source of strength, especially in Britain's case, its naval power and its ability to construct warships as it needs, is undermined, is limited. We can talk about the technological change, we can talk about the coming in of aircraft and all these things. That's true. But that's something which doesn't register in the national psyche till after World War II has been and gone. Okay? In the 1920s, you're talking about naval power. 1920s, that is what you're talking about, naval power. So, the Equitable Treaty, as it all lists out. It's based around, the entire system is based around balance and fairness, but also giving everyone just that little bit more than their minimum requirements. So they go away thinking they've won, but not so much more they go away actually having won. Because that's the real trick of a treaty, a peace treaty, a treaty which is supposed to limit arms. You want people to go away thinking they've won enough that they want to work within the treaty, but not that they've won so much that they can abuse the treaty. It's a balancing act. It's a high wire. And it's actually quite possible to have done. I said it. For starters, why have I gone with the capital ship tonnage? Why have I included that? Because then everyone will feel they are building to the maximum capability they can. They are building ships which are viable warships. So they'll have the confidence of that. And they're building enough because of the new ratios that they're going to feel strong. And before you start saying, well, there's the economic reasons, not they don't want to build these warships. Well, again, Britain actually is building ships. So is America, so is Japan. Can they necessarily afford them? Well, that's the debate. But the thing is, for Britain and America, they can afford them. For Britain, it's a case of, yes, they want to prioritize paying down the debt from World War One, but it's not going to cost them that much money, especially considering the infrastructure they've already got in existence, to actually keep those ships going and to keep some construction going. And they might well do a slower construction program than I've put in there. They might. They might just keep it a pair of if they're building a pair of ships every 2 years, that's not going to strain the British economy. Yes, that's not the 4G freeze followed by 4N freeze followed by 4 da 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 da. But they build around and Rodney and Nelson quite happily. They keep building at a rate of two every couple of years. It's not going to strain the economy. It's not going to strain the government finances. So they can do it. And actually, it's going to create employment and it's going to create consistent income for the shipyards, which is quite a good thing in an economy because it means it's consistent work in areas which are traditionally quite poor and need to suffer from employment, which is good politics for the governments. It's the same for the US. That consistent flow of construction can help their economy. So yes, I agree with you. It's the treaty as I'm proposing would not create a scenario, which is what they want to avoid, of another Anglo-German naval race. They're worried about it. Well, Roskild's especially worried about it, but a few people seem to be worried about the idea of there being an Anglo-US naval race. Mostly when you look at it, you realize that that's not going to last that long because the US Congress are never going to fund it. It would be probably one term maximum before US Congress started not funding things. And remember, the US Congress have long been the scariest threat to the US Navy. They often are. So it would have kept some construction going, and actually might have helped the US in that regards by they would have had a reason to keep some construction going, which the USN would have probably quite liked. It would have also kept the French and the Italians probably constructing a little bit more. Not much more though. If you think about it, the Italians are allowed 3 more capital ships. If the Royal Navy, instead of building 42,000-ton ships, builds 40,000-ton ships, they can get 21. Which means they could maintain 3 fleets of 7 in The UK, seven in the Home Fleet, 7 in the Mediterranean, 7 in the Indian Ocean. Which means technically, yes, in the Mediterranean, the Italians would outnumber them by 1 ship. But as long as the French had at least 4 on the Mediterranean, well, theoretically, that's 11 to 8. And that's before you consider, does the Britain bring any back from the Indian Ocean, etc. Again, Indian Ocean, if they have 7 there, yes. The Japanese have 14. But if they're going to try and overwhelm the British 7, which they could do with 14, then they've got to turn their back and accept losses on whatever the Americans have, which could be another 10 sitting in the Pacific. It creates a system where everyone has enough firepower they can feel confident, but not so much they can feel ebullient. Right, what have we got coming up? And yeah, I'll be interested to see what people comment below about what they think their Equitable treaty would have been. Be an interesting comment to hear about. I'd like to hear your ideas of what you would have liked to sort of Equitable treaty. But remember, the rules I'm using and the guidance I'm using is all of it has to be based within the reality of the conference. It can't be things that are completely rewrite. It can't be, this is my dream idea, this is what it should have been, plucked from thin air, because that's not fair to them. You have to look at the actual context and the actual decisions being made at the time and see what were fitted. Because you can't judge people according to a completely hypothetical. You can look at the treaty they built, look at the discussions that were going on, and go, this is a slightly more moderate and sensible approach based on your own ideas. And this, I think, would have led to a better outcome, which is what I'm doing. I'm not sort of second guessing them. I'm a case of I'm using their own work against them in some ways, which is crueler, but more factually accountable. Anyway, so what have we got coming up today? Of course, was the 4th of June. Tomorrow we start off with London treaties with the capital ships. Then on the 6th of June we have the aircraft carriers. 7th of June we have the Pensacola class. 8th of June we have the Equitable London treaties. 9th of June we have the Equitable London treaties destroyers. And 11th of June, 10th of June we have a UAD video which is possibly going to include a fleet action, but if it does, will only include 2 of the powers in a sort of fleet action of the major powers. 11th of June, Equitable London treaties, sloops and other ships. And 12th of June, Equitable London treaties, fortifications. 13th of June, introduction to US cruiser strategy, 1920s and 30s. 14th of June, Gasano class. And 15th of June, Equitable London treaties, overall Equitable treaties. And then the 16th of June will, of course, be the will be the live discussion of the treaties. 17th of June will be the long patrol for the 18th of June, how to lose some frigates. And 18th of June will be live on how to lose some frigates. 18th of June, 1799, from memory. Take care. There you go. I was right. It's going to be fun. Take care, everyone. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.